Imagine walking into a room full of wealth and elegance and being treated like you don't belong. Now imagine being humiliated in front of everyone, not because of anything you did wrong, but simply because of who you are. That's exactly what happened to Ava, a kind, graceful black woman who came to celebrate success with her husband. But when an arrogant woman tore her dress, thinking she was just a waitress, the entire room froze. What the woman didn't know was that Ava wasn't just a guest. She was the reason the entire event even existed. The CEO, the founder, the visionary behind it all. And when her millionaire husband saw what happened, what followed was a revenge. It was a life-changing lesson, because sometimes the most powerful response to hate is grace. Stay till the end. This story will change how you see respect, power, and true class forever. Welcome to BrainFuel, where every story feeds your mind and inspires your heart. We share powerful real-life stories that challenge arrogance, awaken empathy, and remind us that success means nothing without humility. If you believe in strength through kindness, you're in the right place. This is BrainFuel. Let's light up your mind. It all started with sound that sliced the laughter like a knife. R-I-P-P-P. Every head in the grand ballroom turned. The music stopped. Glasses froze midair. Even the chandelier lights seemed to flicker in shock. A piece of black fabric fluttered slowly to the marble floor. And standing there, eyes wide, face pale, was a woman in a simple but elegant black dress, its hem now torn open. The woman holding the torn fabric, a tall, glamorous socialite in a shimmering silver gown and diamond earrings that sparkled like stars. For a long, unbearable second, no one said a word. The one in black, Amara Reynolds, just stood there, still composed, but her silence was louder than any scream. Across from her, Victoria Lancaster, the woman in silver, gave a smug little smirk as if she'd done something righteous. "You should be more careful next time," Victoria said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "You wouldn't want to ruin another dress. Or maybe this one wasn't yours to begin with." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. A waiter dropped a tray. Someone whispered, "What just happened?" But Victoria wasn't done. She leaned closer, her voice carrying enough for half the room to hear. "Next time, remember your place. This is a gala, not a costume party." And that was the moment the truth started to unfold, a truth that would soon flip every assumption upside down. Because the woman Victoria just humiliated in front of 100 people wasn't a waitress. She wasn't an assistant. She wasn't some uninvited guest trying to fit in. She was the host's wife. And her husband, the man who built the empire sponsoring this entire charity event, was watching everything. Just minutes before that shocking moment, the ballroom had been a scene of pure elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast golden halos over marble floors. A jazz band played softly near the stage. The city's elite, bankers, politicians, celebrities, mingled, laughed, and clinked champagne glasses beneath banners that read, "Hearts for Change, Empowering Women and Communities." Ironically, the very event meant to celebrate women's strength and equality was about to expose the deepest kind of prejudice. Amara had been walking through the crowd, helping a group of young waitresses carry trays of champagne. She wasn't doing it for show. She genuinely liked being part of the team, helping out, making sure guests felt comfortable. It was just who she was. She moved with quiet confidence. Her skin glowed beneath the lights, her posture graceful, her smile soft. Her dress, simple, hand-stitched by a young local designer, looked classic, not extravagant. But to someone blinded by pride, that simplicity looked like cheap. And that's exactly what caught Victoria Lancaster's attention. Victoria was the kind of woman who thought wealth was measured by how loudly you could display it. Her jewelry wasn't worn, it announced itself. Her perfume didn't whisper, it commanded attention. She'd married into money and treated every social gathering like a battlefield where she had to prove she was richer, prettier, and more important than everyone else. So when she saw Amara smiling warmly and offering champagne to a few guests, Victoria's mind instantly made assumptions. She's a server, probably hired last minute, trying too hard to look fancy. Her lip curled slightly. She watched Amara for a while, whispering little comments to the women beside her. I mean, who lets the staff wear something black and elegant? Isn't that confusing for guests? The women giggled nervously, not wanting to agree, but not daring to disagree either. Minutes later, fate or karma would give Victoria a stage she regrets stepping onto. Amara, making her rounds, passed near Victoria's table. One of the guests accidentally bumped into Victoria's chair, causing her drink to wobble. Victoria spun around sharply, and her eyes landed on Amara. "Oh, of course," she said dramatically, brushing imaginary liquid off her gown. "Careful, you almost spilled on me." Amara blinked, calm and polite. "I'm so sorry if I came too close, ma'am." The tone was respectful, sincere. But to Victoria, it sounded like an admission of guilt. She smirked. "Maybe next time, focus on serving the drinks instead of mingling with guests, A few nearby people looked away, awkwardly. Amara smiled faintly, choosing peace over pride. "I'm not," she began to explain, but Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Just go fetch me another napkin," she said with a condescending laugh. "And maybe try not to rip that too." That was it. The guest's laughter, nervous, uneasy, fed her ego. She'd embarrassed someone she thought was beneath her, and she loved the power of it. But what happened next, no one saw coming. As Amara tried to walk away gracefully, Victoria, drunk on arrogance and champagne, grabbed her dress. "Wait! You missed a spot," she said mockingly, pretending to brush off Amara's shoulder. Then, in her exaggerated motion, her ring caught the fabric and tore it open. The sound echoed across the hall. Riot. It was as if the entire gala stopped breathing. Victoria gasped dramatically, holding up the torn fabric like a trophy. "Oh dear, I didn't mean to. Well, maybe that'll remind you to be careful next time." Amara didn't move, didn't shout, didn't cry. She just stood there, composed, regal, her eyes holding Victoria's with quiet strength. And in that moment, everyone in the room could feel it. Something had shifted. The once arrogant whispers turned into murmurs of discomfort. The band members exchanged glances. One of the staff stepped forward as if to say something, but then stopped frozen as a tall man began walking toward the scene. His presence alone commanded attention. Broad-shouldered, dressed in a black tuxedo, with eyes that could freeze fire, Marcus Reynolds, the billionaire philanthropist and host of the night, moved with silent intensity. People immediately parted for him like waves. And when he reached Amara, the truth shattered the silence. He slipped his arm gently around her shoulders, looked at the torn fabric, and then at Victoria. "Did I just see what I think I saw?" he asked quietly, but the steel in his tone made everyone's blood run cold. Victoria blinked, confused. I was just teaching her to be careful with guests." "Guests?" Marcus repeated, his voice low. "This woman is my wife." The entire ballroom gasped, and before Victoria could even breathe a word, Marcus' expression hardened. "You just tore the dress off the woman who owns this building." The silence that followed was deafening. And that's how one act of arrogance, one snap judgment, turned a glamorous night into a moment no one would ever forget. Because in that single rip of fabric, the mask of high society had fallen away, revealing who truly had class and who never did. Long before that humiliating scene, the night had started like a dream. The grand ballroom of the Orion Hotel glowed like something out of a movie. Dozens of chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering diamonds of light across gold-trimmed walls. Soft jazz played from a live band in the corner, and guests in elegant gowns and tuxedos mingled with effortless smiles. Waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne. Laughter echoed around every corner, and the air shimmered with perfume and money. It was the annual Hearts for Change Charity Gala, one of the city's most prestigious events. Invitations were harder to get than front-row seats at the Oscars. Everyone who mattered, politicians, celebrities, tech billionaires, was there, and at the center of it all stood the man who made it happen, Marcus Reynolds. Marcus wasn't born into wealth. He'd built his empire from scratch, starting with a small construction company that grew into a multi-billion-dollar real estate network. People admired his story. They called him the dream builder, a man who not only built skyscrapers, but also rebuilt communities. But those who truly knew Marcus would tell you that his success wasn't just about him. It was about Amara, his wife, his partner, his anchor. Together, they had built not just wealth, but a legacy. Amara was a designer, philanthropist, and quiet visionary who believed that true success wasn't measured in dollars, but in how many lives it could lift along the way. This gala was her idea. She had planned everything, down to the flowers on each table and the music that matched the mood of hope. The goal was to raise funds for scholarships, shelters, and programs for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds. To Amara, this wasn't just another charity event. It was personal. As guests entered, Amara greeted them with her signature warmth. She didn't put on airs or act superior. She treated everyone, guests, staff, and volunteers, with the same respect. "Welcome, Mr. Harlan," she said, shaking hands with an older donor. "I'm so glad you could make it." He smiled, clearly charmed. "Mrs. Reynolds, this place looks incredible. You outdo yourself every year." She chuckled softly. "Well, I had a lot of help. The real heroes tonight are the young women this event supports." That was Amara, always humble, always redirecting credit to others. She moved gracefully between conversations, her presence bringing calm wherever she went. Her black dress, sleek, minimal, but perfectly tailored, reflected her personality. She didn't need glitter to shine. Her confidence and kindness were her glow. But not everyone in the room saw it that way. Across the ballroom, Victoria Lancaster had just arrived with her entourage. Her entrance was impossible to miss. The silver sequin gown she wore shimmered like a mirror under the lights. A diamond choker hugged her neck, and her heels clicked like gunfire on marble. Heads turned. Cameras flashed. That's exactly how she liked it. Victoria's family was old money, an oil dynasty. She'd grown up in luxury and carried herself like the world owed her admiration. She didn't just want attention, she expected it. When her husband leaned toward her and said, "You look beautiful tonight," she replied with a smug little smile, "Of course I do. I didn't come here to blend in." But her smile faded when she noticed Amara. From across the room, she watched Amara laughing softly with guests, helping the staff carry trays, arranging flower vases, making sure no one felt ignored. Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Who's she?" she asked her friend, a blonde socialite beside her. "Oh, that's Amara Reynolds," the woman whispered. "She's Marcus's wife. You know, the host." Victoria blinked, frowning. Her? The one in that plain black dress. Her tone was dripping with disbelief. She tilted her head, studying Amara as if she were a mystery she didn't like. No designer jewelry. No diamonds. No couture. "Are you sure?" Her friend nodded awkwardly. "Pretty sure, yes. She's a creative director for the foundation, too." Victoria scoffed. "She looks like part of the staff. What kind of millionaire's wife dresses like that?" The women around her chuckled nervously. Victoria's comments always walked the line between rude and cruel, but no one dared challenge her. Meanwhile, Amara was chatting with the catering team near the entrance. "You're doing great, everyone," she told them kindly. "If anyone needs a break, just rotate. I'll cover for a few minutes." One of the younger waitresses blushed. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "It's Amara," she said with a smile. "And I know what it's like to be on your feet all night. Let me help." She took a tray of champagne glasses and started walking through the crowd, offering drinks. Guests smiled and thanked her, not realizing who she was, and she didn't mind. She believed real leadership meant serving others, not being served. But that's when Victoria spotted her again, holding a tray. "Oh, I knew it," Victoria said smugly. "I told you she looked like staff. She's literally serving drinks now." Her words came out sharp, laced with superiority. She didn't care that people nearby heard her. As the night went on, the contrast between the two women became more obvious. Amara was everywhere, checking the silent auction tables, thanking volunteers, even dancing with a few of the scholarship girls who had benefited from her programs. She radiated authenticity. Every smile was real. Victoria, on the other hand, stayed glued to her champagne glass, scanning the room for people worth impressing. She bragged loudly about her husband's latest business deal, her vacation home in Monaco, and her custom diamond collection. Still, no one seemed particularly interested. The crowd naturally gravitated toward Amara. That only made Victoria's irritation grow. At one point, she caught Amara helping a guest pick up a dropped napkin and snapped under her breath, "Pathetic, acting like a servant to look noble. How desperate." Her friend tried to whisper, "Victoria, maybe just let it go." But Victoria wasn't the kind of woman who let things go. In her mind, this mysterious black woman, who dressed simply, moved humbly, and refused to show off, was some sort of threat to her social standing. It wasn't logic, it was ego. And as the night went on, that ego began to boil. By the time dinner was served, she'd already made up her mind. She would find a way to put that woman in her place. If only she knew whose place she was really talking about. Because while Victoria was busy polishing her ego, Marcus Reynolds had just finished giving a heartfelt speech about humility, perseverance, and kindness, values he said he learned from his wife, Amara. The entire ballroom had applauded. People stood. Cameras flashed. But Victoria? She wasn't even listening. She was glaring at Amara, her next target. And in less than an hour, that glare would turn into a moment of public humiliation she'd regret for the rest of her life. Because when pride blinds you, you can't see the truth, even when it's standing right in front of you. The night was moving perfectly, or so it seemed. The music, the laughter, the shimmering lights, it all painted a picture of elegance. But sometimes, in the most beautiful rooms, ugliness hides in plain sight. And that ugliness had just walked in wearing a silver gown. Victoria Lancaster had officially arrived, and with her, a storm of entitlement. She strutted through the entrance of the ballroom like she was walking down a red carpet, the train of her sequin dress glinting under the chandeliers. A professional photographer caught her pose mid-step. She smiled, knowing exactly how to angle her chin for the best shot. People greeted her politely, though many rolled their eyes the moment she turned away. Everyone knew Victoria's reputation: rich, loud, and dangerously self-centered. Her husband, Charles Lancaster, an oil tycoon nearly 20 years her senior, followed behind her quietly, as he always did. He was used to it. He'd learned that silence was easier than correcting her arrogance. Victoria looked around the ballroom with a smirk of approval. "Finally, someone understands luxury," she said to her assistant, fanning herself dramatically. "Though I do see a few questionable outfits." Her assistant, a timid young woman named Grace, just nodded quickly. She'd learned long ago that disagreeing with Victoria was a bad idea. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Victoria saw something, or rather, someone, a young black woman with natural curls swept neatly into a bun, wearing a long black dress. The woman was walking across the room, carefully balancing a tray of champagne flutes. Her posture was elegant, her movements smooth, like she didn't just belong there, but graced the space she walked through. Victoria frowned slightly. "Who's that?" she asked Grace. Grace glanced over. I think that's Mrs. Reynolds, ma'am, the host's wife." Victoria blinked in disbelief. "Her?" she said, her voice loud enough that a few nearby guests looked over. "You're joking." "No, ma'am," Grace said softly. "That's her, Marcus Reynolds' wife. She helps run the foundation." Victoria tilted her head, unimpressed. "She looks like part of the staff." She turned to her husband, who had just joined her with a drink. "Charles, would you believe that woman in black is the host's wife?" Charles glanced briefly and shrugged. "I've met her once or twice. She's lovely, very humble." "Humble," Victoria repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "There's a difference between humble and plain. That dress, ugh, it looks like something off a clearance rack." Charles sighed. "Victoria, please, don't start." But she was already starting. Meanwhile, across the room, Amara was helping the catering team carry drinks. She wasn't doing it for attention. She genuinely enjoyed helping. The waitstaff adored her for it. "Mrs. Reynolds," one of them whispered, "you don't have to do this. You're the host." Amara smiled kindly. "If I ever forget what it means to serve others in all of this," she gestured to the glittering ballroom, means nothing. Her words carried no bitterness, only warmth. That was who Amara was, gentle but grounded. She believed that leadership wasn't about standing above others, but beside them. But from across the room, Victoria saw only one thing, a woman she mistook for a waitress trying to act important. Later that evening, while Amara made her rounds greeting guests, Victoria couldn't resist making comments under her breath. "Oh, look, there she goes again," Victoria muttered to her friend, sipping champagne, smiling and pretending she belongs here. "It's adorable, really." Her friend, embarrassed, whispered, "Victoria, that's the host's wife. Maybe just let her be?" But Victoria wasn't listening. The more she watched Amara, the more her jealousy grew. She couldn't stand how people naturally gravitated toward Amara, how the staff smiled when she passed, how even the wealthiest guests seemed drawn to her calm presence. To Victoria, that wasn't grace. It was audacity. Who did she think she was? As the evening went on, Marcus Reynolds took the stage to give his welcome speech. The lights dimmed. The crowd hushed. "Good evening, everyone." Marcus began with a warm smile. "Tonight, we celebrate not just success, but compassion, the power of lifting others as we rise. This foundation wouldn't exist without the woman who inspires me every single day, my wife, Amara." Spotlights turned toward Amara. The audience clapped. Some stood to applaud. But Victoria? She clapped slowly, unimpressed, whispering to Grace, "This is what passes for a philanthropist now? A woman in a plain dress." Grace said nothing. She didn't have to. The look she gave Victoria said it all. After the speech, Marcus mingled with donors while Amara went to check on the volunteers. She noticed one of the catering girls struggling to replace an empty champagne tray. "Here, let me take that," Amara said gently, taking the heavy tray from her hands. "You go rest for a minute. I'll circulate this one." The girl smiled gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am." Amara walked gracefully through the crowd, offering drinks, chatting casually with guests, and making everyone feel seen. But as she passed Victoria's table, she didn't realize she was walking into trouble. Victoria leaned toward her friend, pretending to be curious. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sugary sweet but her eyes sharp. "Do you have the rose champagne? I prefer it chilled, not too cold, though. You know how it is." Amara blinked for a second, then smiled politely. "Of course. I'll make sure someone brings that over right away." She was about to move on when Victoria added, "Oh, and tell your manager the waitstaff uniforms could use some improvement. That black dress looks a bit too fancy for serving drinks, don't you think?" Her voice carried across the table. People heard. A few guests glanced up, uncomfortable. Amara's calm expression didn't falter. She simply replied, "I'll keep that in mind," and walked away. Victoria chuckled. "So polite," she said mockingly. "At least she knows how to take feedback." Her friend shook her head. "Victoria, you really shouldn't." "Oh, please," Victoria interrupted. "Someone has to teach her her place." She didn't know it yet, but those would be the last words she'd say before her downfall began. Because on the other side of the room, Marcus had seen the entire exchange from a distance. His smile faded slightly, his brow tightening. He didn't step in yet. He knew his wife could handle herself. But there was something about the way Victoria looked at Amara, like she was nothing, that made his blood simmer. He turned to a colleague and said quietly, "I've seen arrogance before, but that woman, she's about to learn something tonight." Back at the table, Victoria took another sip of her champagne, feeling triumphant. She leaned back, smirking as she watched Amara disappear into the crowd. "She'll remember that," she said to herself. "Next time she'll think twice before dressing above her station." Her friends didn't laugh this time. They didn't say a word, because deep down they all felt it. Something was coming, and when it did, it would tear through that ballroom louder than any music that played that night. The ballroom glittered like a dream, but under that beauty, something ugly was about to surface. The charity gala had reached its peak. Dinner was served. The lights dimmed to a warm amber glow, and a soft jazz melody filled the air. Guests were laughing, clinking glasses, and taking photos for social media. Everything seemed perfect. but all perfection hides its cracks. And tonight, that crack had a name, Victoria Lancaster. She sat at her table surrounded by her usual circle of admirers, swirling her wine and pretending to listen as one of them bragged about his yacht. But her eyes kept flicking across the room, always landing on her, Amara Reynolds. Every time Amara smiled, Victoria's jaw tightened. Every time someone complimented Amara, Victoria's hand gripped her wine glass a little harder. The contrast between them was infuriating. Amara wasn't loud, wasn't dressed in diamonds, didn't need attention. Yet people gravitated to her, naturally, effortlessly. She wasn't trying to shine. She just did. And for a woman like Victoria, who lived her entire life needing to be the center of the spotlight, that was unbearable. At one point, Amara walked over to a group of young women near the back, scholarship recipients, girls from underprivileged backgrounds who had benefited from the Reynolds Foundation. "You all look stunning," Amara said warmly, straightening one girl's necklace. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong here. You do." The girl smiled shyly, touched by her kindness. But a few feet away, Victoria overheard and rolled her eyes. "How touching," she muttered sarcastically, loud enough for those near her to hear. "Charity work and pep talks. How very saintly." Her friend leaned in, whispering urgently, "Victoria, please don't. Everyone's watching tonight. Just let it go." Victoria smirked. "Oh, I will. But first, I'm going to find out if she's really as graceful as she looks, or if she's just good at playing humble." A few minutes later, as Amara made her way across the room, Victoria stood up. She smoothed the silver fabric of her gown, checked a reflection in the glass of her wine, and walked straight into Amara's path, blocking her intentionally. "Oh, hello," Victoria said with a fake smile. "You're the hostess tonight, aren't you?" Amara smiled kindly. "That's right. Welcome. I'm glad you could make it." Victoria's eyes traveled up and down Amara's dress. "I must say you're quite brave." Amara blinked, puzzled but polite. "Brave?" "Yes," Victoria said, smirking, "to wear something so understated. It's not often someone at an event like this chooses a dress that's simple. It's refreshing." Her tone carried the kind of sweetness that stings. It was a backhanded compliment dipped in poison. Amara, sensing the edge behind the words, smiled softly. "Sometimes simple is powerful," she replied. "It lets the cause shine brighter than the clothes." "Oh, absolutely," Victoria said quickly. "But then again, it helps if people notice you, doesn't it?" She chuckled. "I almost mistook you for part of the staff earlier. You blend right in." The guests nearby went silent. A few exchanged uncomfortable glances. One woman gasped softly and whispered, "Did she just say that?" Amara's heart sank, but her face remained calm. She had experienced this kind of condescension before, people judging her by her skin, her style, her quietness. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Instead, she smiled again. "If helping others means blending in, then I'm happy to." It was a graceful answer, one that should have ended things. But Victoria wasn't done. "Oh, come on, darling," Victoria said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Don't pretend humility is a virtue. We all know these events are about appearances. You might as well enjoy it." "I do enjoy it," Amara replied calmly, "especially when it helps change lives." The sharpness of that response landed like a quiet slap, though Amara didn't mean it that way. The tone was too poised, too unbothered, and that only made Victoria's blood boil. Victoria tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "You really think you belong here, don't you?" Amara's voice was steady. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." "Right," Victoria scoffed. "Well, maybe next time you'll wear something a little more appropriate. People might take you more seriously." This time, Amara didn't respond. She just looked at her, really looked at her. The silence between them was deafening. It was a kind of silence that exposes truth. For a split second, Victoria saw something in Amara's eyes, calm power and confidence, so real it made her feel small. And she hated it. "Excuse me," Amara said softly, trying to walk past. But as she stepped around the table, Her shoulder brushed lightly against Victoria's chair. A few drops of champagne splashed onto Victoria's napkin. That tiny accident was all the excuse she needed. Victoria gasped theatrically, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the marble floor. "Unbelievable!" she snapped, dabbing at her gown even though not a drop had touched it. "Watch where you're going." Heads turned. The music quieted. Even the band faltered. Amara froze, surprised. "I'm so sorry. That wasn't intentional." Victoria raised her voice louder so more people could hear. "Sorry doesn't fix ruined clothes, sweetheart. Maybe next time you'll remember your place before walking into guests." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Waiters stopped in their tracks. One woman whispered, "Did she just say that to Mrs. Reynolds?" Another man frowned. "Wait, does she even know who she's talking to?" But Victoria didn't stop. She stepped closer, her anger or ego taking full control. "Honestly," she said, tugging at the edge of Amara's dress, "this fabric, ugh, cheap material. Probably why it ripped so easily." Before Amara could step back, Victoria's diamond ring snagged the fabric and tore it. The sound, R-I-P-P, cut through the air like thunder. The entire room froze. A piece of Amara's dress hung in Victoria's hand. And for the first time, Victoria looked unsure. Amara stood perfectly still, her chest rising and falling slowly. Her eyes, deep dark and full of quiet power, met Victoria's. She didn't speak. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, calm as ever, while everyone else seemed to forget how to breathe. Somewhere near the back of the room, a man's voice called out, firm and controlled, "Is there a problem here?" Every head turned. Marcus Reynolds, tall, commanding, and unmistakably furious, was walking toward them, his expression carved in stone. Victoria's confidence began to crumble. She took a small step back, her voice trembling. "I was just, she bumped into me." Marcus didn't even look at her. His eyes were on Amara, on the torn dress, on the humiliation she'd just endured in silence. Then he looked at Victoria, and his voice dropped to a deadly calm. "You just tore the dress off my wife." In that instant, every whisper, every judgment, every assumption collapsed like glass shattering. Victoria's mouth fell open, her color drained, and her arrogance, so loud just seconds ago, was replaced by a silence louder than any apology could ever be. The whole ballroom watched as the truth unfolded, and the woman who thought she was the queen of the room realized she'd just crossed the wrong line. For a long, unbearable second, nobody moved. The music had stopped. The chatter had died. All that remained was the sound of crystal glasses trembling slightly on tables, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Victoria's diamond-covered hand still clutched the torn piece of fabric. Her smirk was gone now, replaced with a pale realization of what she'd just done. Across from her, Amara stood tall. The rip in her elegant dress exposed more than silk. It exposed the truth about who she was, and who Victoria had just dared to humiliate. And then the voice came again, deep and calm, but carrying the weight of thunder. "I'll ask again," Marcus said slowly, every word measured. "Is there a problem here?" You could hear the ice in his tone. Every guest turned toward him. Marcus Reynolds was a man who commanded attention the way gravity commands the planets. His presence filled the space. His tuxedo tailored to perfection. His eyes, sharp, unreadable, and locked on Victoria like a lion assessing prey. Victoria blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself. "Oh, Mr. Reynolds," she stammered, forcing a nervous laugh. I didn't realize you were right there. There's been a small misunderstanding." Marcus tilted his head. "A misunderstanding?" "Yes," she said quickly, her words tumbling out. This woman bumped into me and, well, I might have overreacted a little." Amara stayed silent, her expression calm but unreadable. Her silence made the scene even more powerful. Marcus took a slow step forward. The crowd subtly moved back, creating a circle around them. No one dared speak. "You might have overreacted?" Marcus repeated, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "You tore her dress in front of everyone." Victoria's cheeks flushed a deep crimson. I didn't mean to. My ring, it got caught. Oh, your ring, Marcus said softly. So your ring just decided to tear a woman's gown apart in public? Victoria laughed awkwardly. It was an accident. You see, she shouldn't have. Marcus's eyes narrowed. She shouldn't have what? Victoria swallowed hard. The tension in the air was suffocating. Well, I thought she was. Go on, Marcus pressed, his tone deadly calm. You thought she was what? Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought she was one of the staff. The silence that followed was explosive. A gasp rippled across the ballroom. People exchanged horrified looks. One man muttered under his breath. She just admitted it. Another woman covered her mouth, whispering, Oh my God! Marcus's jaw clenched, but his voice remained dangerously calm. So let me get this straight, he said slowly, stepping closer. You thought my wife, your host, was one of the wait staff, and based on that assumption, you decided it was okay to insult her and tear her dress? Victoria's eyes widened in horror. Your wife? Marcus nodded once. Yes, my wife. Her mouth fell open. Her face drained of color completely. I didn't know, she stammered. I swear, Mr. Reynolds, I had no idea. I thought. Marcus cut her off sharply. You thought she wasn't worth respect because of what you assumed, because of her skin, because she wasn't wearing $1,000 gown like yours. Isn't that right? Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth was plain for everyone to see. Amara stood quietly, her eyes glistening, but not from tears, from strength. She wasn't humiliated anymore. She was empowered, because in that moment, everyone saw her not as a victim, but as the calm before the storm. Marcus turned to her gently, his expression softening for the first time. Are you all right, sweetheart? She nodded. I'm fine, she said quietly, her voice steady. He nodded once, then faced the crowd. For those of you who may not know, he said, his voice carrying to the ballroom, this woman right here, Amara Reynolds, is not just my wife. She's the founder of the Reynolds Foundation, the very reason we're all gathered here tonight. Every scholarship, every donation, every opportunity exists because of her vision. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Marcus continued, his voice commanding yet filled with pride. She works harder than anyone I know. She gives without asking for recognition. She builds futures for those who were told they had none. And tonight, someone decided to tear her down, literally, because she assumed she wasn't good enough to be respected. He turned back to Victoria, his tone now laced with quiet disappointment. Tell me, Victoria, is that what you call class? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Please, I didn't mean to offend. But you did, Marcus said firmly, and not just her. Every woman in this room who's ever been underestimated. Every person who's been judged for how they look, not who they are. Someone in the crowd began to clap. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into applause. Loud, echoing applause that filled the hall with justice. Victoria stood frozen, surrounded by hundreds of people who now saw her for what she truly was. Her carefully crafted image, the socialite, the trendsetter, the queen of elegance, crumbled right before her eyes. Amara, meanwhile, took a deep breath and walked gracefully to Marcus's side. Despite the tear in her dress, she walked like royalty. She turned to Victoria, her tone soft yet powerful. You know, she said gently, I used to think people like you couldn't change. But maybe this moment will make you think before you look down on someone again. Victoria's lips trembled, but she couldn't reply. Amara offered a faint, kind smile, not to humiliate, but to rise above. You might have torn my dress, she said quietly, but you didn't tear my dignity. And with that, she turned and walked away, her head held high, hand in hand with her husband. As the applause grew louder, Victoria sank slowly into her chair, tears slipping down her cheeks. The cameras that once adored her now avoided her. The whispers she used in joy now felt like daggers. Meanwhile, Amara was surrounded by guests offering kind words, respect, and admiration. And when Marcus leaned down to whisper, "You handle that perfectly," she smiled softly and said, "Grace always wins." Marcus smiled back. "That's why I married you." But as they walked out of the ballroom together, one final image lingered. Victoria staring at the torn piece of fabric still clutched in her trembling hand. A reminder how arrogance had destroyed her reputation in seconds. The woman who thought she owned the night had just been outshined by the one she tried to humiliate. And as the doors closed behind Amara and Marcus, every guest in that ballroom knew one thing for sure. Real power doesn't shout. It simply stands tall, even in a torn dress. The night of the gala ended, but the echoes of what happened inside that ballroom didn't. They spilled out into the night, into whispers, into headlines, into the digital veins of the internet that never forgets. By sunrise, the story had already gone viral. The first video came from a guest's phone, a shaky clip that caught the exact moment Marcus Reynolds said those 7 devastating words. "You just tore the dress off my wife." The clip spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, news channels, talk shows. It was the kind of story the internet lived for, arrogance meeting karma in real time. People couldn't stop replaying it. The reactions came pouring in. "Wow, she really thought the founder was a waitress." "Amara handled that like a queen." "Grace under pressure. That's real class." "Karma in a designer gown." Within 12 hours, the hashtag torn dress truth was trending worldwide. Meanwhile, Amara and Marcus were home, sitting on their terrace overlooking the city skyline. The early morning sun painted the horizon gold, but Amara's heart was heavy. She didn't want fame from humiliation. She wanted peace. Marcus placed a mug of coffee in front of her and said softly, "The media's all over it. They're calling you the woman who stood tall." Amara sighed. "I didn't do anything heroic. I just didn't stoop to her level." "That's what makes it heroic," Marcus said. "You didn't need to shout. You let truth speak for itself." Amara smiled faintly. "It's strange, isn't it? One act of arrogance can expose someone completely." Marcus nodded. "And one act of grace can inspire millions." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the city waking up, unaware that Amara's story was already becoming a symbol for dignity, self-worth, and quiet strength. While Amara's name trended in praise, Victoria's world was unraveling fast. At first, she tried to control the narrative. Her PR team released a statement saying it was a minor misunderstanding and taken out of context. But the internet wasn't buying it. People dug up her old interviews, the ones where she bragged about high standards and knowing quality people. They resurfaced quotes that now made her sound even more out of touch. Memes flooded in. Photos of dresses captioned "handle with humility" or "careful, might tear your reputation." Victoria's inbox was flooded with backlash. Sponsors pulled deals. Her upcoming fashion collaboration was postponed indefinitely. The woman who once strutted red carpets now couldn't walk outside without being recognized, not for her beauty or style, but for her arrogance. 3 days later, a reporter found her outside her penthouse, sunglasses on, voice trembling as she said, "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I made a mistake." But it was too late. The damage was done. The same crowd that once applauded her now turned their backs. And as she scrolled through thousands of comments online that night, one particular message stood out. "You tore a dress, but she tore your ego." Victoria shut her phone and burst into tears. For the first time in her life, she realized respect isn't something you buy with diamonds. It's something you earn with kindness. Back at the Reynolds Foundation, things were different too. The story had drawn massive attention to their cause. Donations tripled. News outlets requested interviews. Magazines called Amara the woman who redefined elegance. But Amara stayed the same, humble, warm, focused. She didn't want revenge. She wanted meaning. One afternoon, she was helping a group of scholarship students organize their files when a girl shyly approached her. "Mrs. Reynolds," the girl said softly, "I saw what happened to you online. You didn't shout, you didn't fight back. You just stood there. That inspired me." Amara smiled gently. Sometimes silence speaks louder than anger, she said. People remember how you made them feel, not how loud you were. The girl nodded, eyes shining. That's the kind of woman I want to be someday. And in that moment, Amara realized something powerful. What happened that night wasn't just humiliation. It was transformation. Her story had become a mirror for people everywhere, reflecting the strength that comes from self-respect. A week later, the foundation hosted a small private dinner. Nothing extravagant, just family, friends, and a few longtime supporters. As the guests arrived, one of the security guards whispered something to Marcus. He looked up, surprised, then turned to Amara. "She's here," he said quietly. Amara looked toward the entrance, and there stood Victoria. No glittering gown, no entourage, no cameras. Just a simple black dress and trembling hands holding a small envelope. For a moment, no one moved. The air was heavy with tension. But Amara, ever composed, walked toward her. Victoria lowered her gaze. "I shouldn't be here," she said softly, "but I had to come." Amara's expression was calm. "You came to apologize?" Victoria nodded. "Yes, I was wrong. About you, about everything. I was raised to think status meant worth. That night showed me how wrong I was. I humiliated you and you could have destroyed me, but you didn't." Amara studied her face for a long moment. "Do you understand now why it hurt?" "Yes," Victoria whispered. "Because it wasn't about a dress. It was about respect." Amara nodded slowly. "Good. Then maybe you've learned something." Victoria handed her the envelope. "It's a donation for the foundation. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to help." Amara took the envelope and smiled faintly. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said softly. "It means freeing yourself from hate. I already forgave you." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered before quietly leaving the room. That night, Amara and Marcus sat together once more, watching the city lights flicker below. Marcus put his arm around her. "You really forgave her?" Amara nodded. "I did. People like her don't need punishment. They need understanding. Maybe she'll finally become someone better." Marcus smiled. "You have the rarest kind of strength. You know that?" Amara chuckled softly. "No, I just believe in giving people the chance to grow, even if they once tore your dress." He kissed her forehead gently. "That's what makes you unforgettable." And as the camera fades out, the narration returns. Sometimes life tests you in front of everyone, not to show your weakness, but your strength. When someone tries to tear you down, stand taller. Because real power isn't loud. It's silent, steady, and full of grace. The screen fades to black with the words, "Respect is a fabric of dignity. Never tear it." Days turn into weeks, but the impact of that one night didn't fade. It grew. What started as a shocking ballroom incident had transformed into something much bigger, something powerful, something people could feel. Because when Amara Reynolds stood tall in her torn dress and didn't fight back with anger, she did something revolutionary in a world obsessed with image and ego. She showed what real strength looks like. The moment Marcus's words echoed across that ballroom, "You just tore the dress off my wife," it didn't just expose arrogance. It exposed truth. And now, weeks later, that truth had taken root everywhere. Across social media, millions of people began sharing their own stories under hashtags like #GraceWins, #StandTall, and #TornDressMovement. A waitress posted about being talked down by customers, writing, "Tonight, I remembered Mrs. Reynolds and held my head high. Respect yourself, even when they don't." A young man from South Africa posted a photo of his mother in her work uniform, captioning it, "She may wear an apron, but she raised a king. Don't judge by clothes. Judge by heart." Influencers, CEOs, students, and parents, everyone was talking about the woman in the torn dress. It wasn't just a viral story anymore. It was a reflection of how people wanted to live, with dignity, empathy, and grace. Amara herself was overwhelmed. One morning, her assistant rushed into her office, holding a stack of letters. "You need to see this," she said breathlessly. Amara raised an eyebrow. "More donations?" The assistant shook her head, smiling. "No, Letters, hundreds of them, from people thanking you. Amara looked through them, one by one. You made me realize I don't need to prove my worth to anyone. My daughter showed your video at school. They had a whole discussion about racism and respect. Thank you for teaching me that class isn't about clothes. It's about character. Amara's eyes softened. These are the real rewards, she whispered. Meanwhile, news networks couldn't stop talking about her. Headlines read, "The woman who redefined class." From humiliation to heroism, how one moment changed everything. Grace under fire. Amara Reynolds inspires a generation. She was invited on talk shows, podcasts, and global conferences. But Amara never used those moments to talk about the gala. She didn't name or shame Victoria. Instead, she turned every interview into a message. People often confuse silence with weakness, she said in one interview. But sometimes silence is strength, the power to not respond with hate. That's what changes a world. Her calmness, her poise, her refusal to turn scandal into spectacle. That's what won hearts. Soon, universities invited her to speak about resilience and respect. Corporate leaders requested her insights on humility in leadership. And most importantly, young girls everywhere began to see her as a symbol of strength. One viral clip showed a 10-year-old girl standing on stage at her school, wearing a small white dress with a patch sewn over it. "My name is Layla," the girl said proudly, "and this patch is my reminder that even if life tears your dress, you can still walk tall." That clip alone got over 50 million views. Amara watched it with tears in her eyes. "This," she whispered, "is why that night had to happen." But with all the attention came another test. Fame. Marcus was cautious. "You're trending every week now," he told her one evening as they had dinner. "Just promise me you won't lose yourself in all this." Amara smiled. "Don't worry. The same humility that made people notice me will keep me grounded." He nodded proudly. "That's my girl." They both laughed, unaware that, at that very moment, the torn dress movement was being discussed in classrooms, boardrooms, and even political circles. Schools began introducing a Respect Day, where students wore simple clothes and shared stories of humility. Corporations started workshops on treating employees with dignity, and charities reported record-breaking donations inspired by Amara's story. It was more than a trend now. It was a transformation. But perhaps the most touching moment came from the most unexpected place. A few months after the incident, Amara received a handwritten note from someone she hadn't heard from since that night, Victoria. The letter began with trembling words. "Dear Amara, I don't expect forgiveness again, but I needed to tell you this. Your grace saved me from myself." Victoria wrote about how, after the scandal, she lost nearly everything: her sponsorships, her social standing, her so-called friends. But in losing those things, she found something else: perspective. "I started volunteering at a shelter. I wanted to understand the people I once looked down on, and I've learned more in 2 months there than in 20 years of luxury. You were right. Respect isn't earned by money. It's earned by how you make people feel. Thank you for not destroying me when you could have. You changed my life." Amara folded the letter gently and smiled. "Maybe grace really does come full circle," she whispered. Later that month, she was invited to speak at an international women's summit in London. As she walked on a grand stage, wearing a white gown inspired by the same one that had been torn that night, now repaired, elegant, and whole again, the crowd rose to their feet in applause. When the room finally quieted, Amara began. "A while ago, someone tried to tear me down, and in doing so, tore my dress. But that moment taught me something powerful. You can tear fabric, but you can't tear dignity. You can stain a dress, but you can't stain character. And you can try to humiliate someone, but only they can decide whether to feel small." The audience erupted in applause. She smiled and continued. "So to every person who's ever been judged by how they look, where they come from, or what they wear, remember this. Your worth isn't defined by someone else's ignorance. It's defined by your kindness, your resilience, and your grace." Her speech became one of the most watched videos of the year, over 200 million views worldwide. And just like that, the woman who was once mistaken for just a waitress became a global icon of respect and humanity. That night, as Amara and Marcus stood outside under the stars after the event, he looked at her and said, "You turned pain into purpose." Amara smiled softly. "That's what we're all here to do, Marcus. Turn our torn moments into lessons that heal the world." He wrapped an arm around her, and as the lights of London sparkled behind them, it felt like the world itself was applauding not her fame, but her heart. The moment the dress tore, time seemed to freeze. Gasps filled the air, echoing like thunder across the golden ballroom. For a few seconds, nobody moved. It was as if the entire party had stopped breathing. The soft melody that had been playing in the background faded into silence, and every eye turned toward the scene in the center of the room. Clara stood there, her hand still clutching the shredded fabric of the gown. The once beautiful white satin now hung in torn, jagged ribbons, revealing the shimmer of an elegant golden lining underneath. Across from her, Ava stood frozen, her face pale but her eyes steady, filled not with tears but with quiet strength. The arrogant woman blinked, her expression twisting from satisfaction to horror as realization slowly dawned. But before she could speak, a deep, commanding voice cut through the silence like a blade. What on earth just happened here? Every head turned toward the entrance. Standing there was a tall man in a dark, tailored suit. His presence alone shifted the energy in the room. It was Michael, Ava's husband, a man whose success stories have been written about in every business magazine, whose calm power could silence even the loudest crowd. He moved closer, his steps echoing across the marble floor. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, landed on the torn dress, then on his wife, and then finally on Clara. Clara's confident smile faltered. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she began quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. "It was an accident. I didn't realize she—" But Michael raised his hand, cutting her off. "You didn't realize she what?" His voice was calm, but the weight behind it could be felt in every corner of the room. Clara hesitated, her throat tightening. I didn't realize she was your wife. I thought she was a waitress." Ava finished softly, her tone gentle but unflinching. The room grew even quieter. The whispers that had begun to form among the guests died out instantly. Clara opened her mouth to speak again, but Michael's gaze stopped her cold. "So," he said slowly, his voice low and deliberate, "you tore my wife's dress because you thought she was staff." Clara's face flushed deep red. I didn't mean to. I just thought she was wearing something too elegant for a server. It was a misunderstanding, really." Michael took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "A misunderstanding? You walked up to someone, insulted them, and destroyed their clothes in front of a crowd. Because of what? The color of her skin? Her grace? Or your own insecurity?" Every word struck like thunder. The guests stood frozen, some nodding quietly in agreement, others looking down in shame. Clara's confidence melted completely. Her mouth trembled as she tried to defend herself, but there was nothing left to say. Meanwhile, Ava stood still, poised and calm, even as her heart pounded in her chest. For years, she had endured moments like this quietly, but this time felt different. This time, the truth wasn't going to be buried under polite smiles or silent endurance. Michael turned toward Ava, his expression softening. "Are you all right, my love?" he asked gently. Ava nodded, though her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "I'm fine," she said, "but I wish I could say the same about humanity tonight." A ripple of emotion spread through the guests. Her words struck deep, a mix of grace and pain wrapped in one sentence. Michael looked around the room, scanning the faces of the people who had just witnessed the scene. "I've hosted many events," he said, his tone controlled but firm, "and I believe I was surrounded by people of class and respect. But what I've just seen tonight proves that titles and money don't always make someone decent." The silence in the ballroom thickened. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, some unable to meet his eyes. "Clara," he continued, turning back toward the woman, "you were invited here as a guest, not as a judge of others' worth. My wife built the Carter Foundation that funds education for underprivileged women. She's the reason half of you even have business ties with this company. And he He gestured toward her trembling hand. Just publicly humiliated her. Clara's knees felt weak. I didn't know, she whispered. Michael's expression hardened. That's exactly the problem. You didn't want to know. You saw what you wanted to see. A murmur spread among the guests, and some began to whisper apologies to Ava under their breath. Ava, however, remained calm. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and looked Clara in the eye. I forgive you, she said softly. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding anger would make me like you, and I'm not that woman. The words hung in the air like a soft breeze after a storm, gentle, but powerful enough to change the atmosphere completely. Even those who had stayed silent out of fear now looked at Ava with newfound respect. Clara, trembling, could only whisper, I'm sorry. Ava nodded slightly. I hope you are, and I hope next time you see someone you think is beneath you, you remember this moment. Michael stepped forward again, placing his arm around his wife protectively. That's enough for tonight, he said. Then, turning to the event manager, he added firmly, make sure Mrs. Carter has a replacement gown immediately. Within minutes, an assistant appeared with a luxurious designer dress from one of the fashion sponsors. Ava disappeared briefly into a side room, and when she returned, she looked radiant, not just because of the gown, but because of the quiet strength shining in her eyes. The band began to play again, softly at first. The guests clapped, not out of politeness, but out of genuine admiration. The party slowly resumed, but the tone had completely changed. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. As the evening went on, Michael and Ava danced together under the soft glow of the chandeliers. Every eye in the room was on them, not with judgment this time, but with awe. And somewhere near the back, Clara sat alone, replaying the moment in her mind over and over again. For the first time in her life, she felt the sting of her own arrogance, and realized that true class had nothing to do with money, clothes, or status. That night, Ava didn't just reclaim her dignity. She redefined what it meant to carry grace in a world full of arrogance. The ballroom glowed with golden light once more, but something in the air had shifted completely. What had begun as an evening of glitz and ego was now charged with respect, the kind that couldn't be bought, only earned. The guests whispered softly, some in shame, others in awe of the quiet power Ava had just displayed. As the music played faintly in the background, Michael and Ava stood side by side, their connection radiating through the crowd. They looked like royalty, not because of their clothes, but because of the way they carried themselves, dignified yet humble. But Michael wasn't done. He stepped forward, took the microphone from the stage, and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his deep voice commanding every ear in the room. Before we move forward with tonight's charity auction, I want to say a few words, not as a businessman, but as a man who believes in respect. Every conversation stopped. Even the waiters froze where they stood. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft rhythm of Michael's voice. Tonight, he continued, my wife and I came here to celebrate generosity, to raise funds for the Carter Foundation, which supports education for women who were never given a fair start. But what happened earlier reminds us why that mission matters so deeply. Because it's not just about money. It's about mindset. He paused, scanning the faces of the guests. Some looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Others nodded slowly, realizing the truth behind his words. We live in a world, Michael said, where people still judge others by appearance, by color, by assumptions. My wife walked in here with grace and confidence, and yet she was humiliated because someone thought she didn't belong. Well, let me tell you something. My wife built the very space that people try to exclude her from. Applause rippled through the room. Even the staff members, standing by the wall, couldn't help but clap. Michael's voice grew softer, but more powerful. I've watched Ava work day and night to change lives, from mentoring young girls to funding small business startups run by women of color. She's not just my wife. She's my hero. Ava blinked back tears. The crowd erupted into heartfelt applause, not the shallow kind given to impress others, but real, emotional applause that came from the soul. Even Clara, still sitting quietly in the back corner, clapped slowly, tears forming in her eyes. When the noise settled, Ava gently took the microphone from her husband. Her voice was soft, but every word carried weight. "Thank you, everyone," she began, smiling warmly. "What happened tonight could have broken me, but instead, I choose to see it as a lesson for all of us." She took a deep breath, scanning the room. "I grew up in a neighborhood where people told me I'd never amount to anything. I've been mistaken for an assistant at my own meetings. I've had doors closed in my face because I didn't look like the kind of woman people expected in power. But every single time I stood tall, because my worth doesn't come from how people see me. It comes from how I see myself." The crowd listened in silence, hanging on her every word. Ava smiled sadly. "Clara," she said softly, turning toward the woman in the back, "I know this wasn't your proudest moment, but I want to thank you, because sometimes it takes an uncomfortable experience to open our eyes. Maybe this was yours." Clara's lip trembled. She rose slowly from her chair, her voice cracking as she spoke. "You're right," she admitted quietly. "I was wrong, terribly wrong. I was so busy trying to feel superior that I forgot what it means to be human. And I'm sorry. Truly." Ava nodded, her expression kind. "Apologies mean a lot when they come from the heart. I accept it. But remember, don't just be sorry for what you did to me. Be sorry for every person you've ever looked down on, and change that." The guests clapped again, not for drama, but for redemption. Clara wiped her tears and sat down, her arrogance completely stripped away. For the first time, she didn't feel powerful. She felt human. Ava continued. "The Carter Foundation was created to break these cycles of judgment, of inequality, of ignorance. And tonight, I want this event to represent something bigger than just fundraising. I want it to represent growth." Then she turned toward her husband with a mischievous smile. "Michael, I think we should add a little twist to the charity auction tonight." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what are you thinking?" Ava smiled brightly. "Instead of auctioning off just paintings and jewelry, let's auction off opportunities. Real ones. Internships, mentorship programs, and business consultations from people in this very room. Let's make tonight about giving chances, not showing off wealth." The audience murmured in surprise, then erupted in cheers. Several CEOs immediately stood up, pledging their participation. One offered mentorship sessions. Another promised scholarships. Even Clara, still teary-eyed, raised her hand timidly and said, "I'd like to donate $100,000 to your foundation and volunteer personally." The room went silent again, but this time it wasn't because of shock. It was because everyone felt the power of transformation right in front of them. Ava smiled. "That's what I call growth," she said warmly. "Thank you, Clara." Clara nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Thank you for giving me a second chance to be better." The music swelled again, this time triumphant. The energy in the ballroom had shifted from arrogance to unity, from ego to empathy. Michael placed an arm around Ava and whispered, "You turned humiliation into healing." Ava smiled softly. "Sometimes the only way to win," she said, "is to stay kind when the world expects you to break." That night, donations poured in more than any previous year. The Carter Foundation broke records. But what mattered more was the emotional shift that took place in everyone's hearts. People didn't just leave with lighter wallets. They left with heavier consciences and fuller hearts. As the last guest departed, Clara approached Ava one final time. "I hope one day I can be as strong as you," she said quietly. Ava smiled. "Strength doesn't come from money or status. It comes from humility. You've already taken the first step." They shook hands, a simple gesture, but one that symbolized change. As Ava and Michael left the ballroom that night, hand in hand, the city lights outside sparkled against the dark sky. Ava looked up, her reflection shimmering in the glass doors. She had walked into that party as a target of someone's arrogance, but she walked out as a symbol of grace, forgiveness, and power. Because in a world that often confuses status with worth, Ava Carter reminded everyone that true class can't be worn. It must be lived. The night had finally drawn to a close, but its echoes lingered long after the last note of music faded. The grand ballroom, once filled with arrogance and laughter, now carried an air of calm reflection. The chandeliers dimmed to a golden glow, and the scent of roses mixed softly with the evening breeze drifting to the tall windows. Ava stood near the window, gazing out at the glittering city below. The lights sparkled like tiny reminders of hope, each one representing a lesson learned, a perspective change, a heart awakened. Her reflection stared back at her, not just as a woman who had been humiliated, but as one who had turned that humiliation into something far greater. Michael walked up beside her, slipping his arm gently around her waist. "You handled that better than I ever could," he said with a proud smile. Most people would have walked out after what happened. Ava smiled softly, her eyes never leaving the skyline. If I had walked out, Clara would have walked away thinking she was right. But I couldn't let that happen. I had to stay. I had to show her, and everyone else, that grace isn't weakness. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Grace is your power," he said. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ballroom behind them was nearly empty now. The servers were cleaning up glasses and folded napkins. The hum of the city beyond the glass filled the quiet between them. Then, a gentle voice called from behind. "Mrs. Carter?" Ava turned around. It was Clara, still in her elegant but now slightly rumpled dress, her mascara smudged from tears. She looked nothing like the woman who had strutted into the event earlier, full of pride and superiority. She looked real, vulnerable, human. "Clara," Ava said softly, surprised but not unkindly. "You're still here." Clara nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping forward. "I didn't want to leave without saying this properly. I know I already apologized earlier, but I don't think words are enough." Michael crossed his arms, watching silently as Clara approached. "I spent my entire life believing I was better than people because of my background," Clara confessed. "Because I was raised to think success meant status, and that status gave me the right to look down on others. But tonight, you proved me wrong in every possible way." Her voice cracked slightly as she went on. "When you forgave me, I realized how small I'd been living. You had every right to humiliate me back, and you didn't. You chose dignity. You chose kindness. I've never met someone that strong before." Ava's expression softened. "It takes strength to admit that, Clara. Not everyone can look in the mirror and own their mistakes." Clara smiled weakly. "It's because of you. You changed something in me tonight. I want to be part of your foundation, not just by donating, but by doing real work. I have connections, resources. I want to use them the right way this time." Ava glanced at Michael, who gave her an approving nod. Then she turned back to Clara with a smile. "We'd be happy to have you, Clara. The foundation isn't about who you were. It's about who you choose to become." Tears filled Clara's eyes again. She nodded, holding Ava's hands. "Thank you for everything." After Clara left, Michael let out a long sigh and smiled. "You see what you just did? You didn't just forgive her. You transformed her. That's something no lecture or punishment could ever do." Ava chuckled lightly. "Sometimes people just need a mirror, not a fight. Tonight, I think she finally saw herself clearly." Michael laughed softly, and maybe the rest of them did too. Ava leaned her head against his shoulder, finally feeling the weight of the evening start to lift. "I didn't expect any of this," she admitted. "I came to a charity event, not a life lesson." He squeezed her hand gently. Life has a funny way of teaching lessons where we least expect them. Outside, a faint drizzle began to fall against the tall glass windows. The soft tapping sound was peaceful, a perfect ending to a night that had started with chaos. Michael and Ava slowly walked toward the exit together, their footsteps echoing across the marble floor. As they passed through the doorway, a few staff members stopped to thank Ava quietly. Waiters, caterers, and even a young cleaning lady who had witnessed the entire scene earlier. "Ma'am," the cleaner said shyly, "I just want to say thank you for standing up the way you did. You made all of us proud tonight." Ava's eyes softened. "No, thank you," she said warmly, "because people like you remind me why I started this foundation in the first place." The young woman smiled brightly, and for a moment, Ava saw her younger self, determined, underestimated, but full of potential. As they stepped into the cool night air, the city lights reflected off the wet streets, painting the world in gold. The driver opened the car door, and Ava paused for one last look at the grand building behind her. Michael noticed. "What are you thinking?" She smiled faintly. "I'm thinking about how quickly people judge others. How a single act of kindness or cruelty can change everything. Tonight proved that you can't control how people treat you, but you can always control how you respond." Michael nodded, his voice low, "And your response changed an entire room." They got into the car, and as it pulled away, Ava glanced at her phone. Notifications flooded in. Social media posts, photos, and videos from guests who had recorded the moment. The internet was already buzzing with hashtags like #GraceOverArrogance and #AvaCarterInspires. Michael smiled when he saw it. "Looks like your message is spreading faster than we thought." Ava chuckled softly. "Good. Maybe the world needs a little reminder that humility isn't weakness, it's strength." They drove through the glowing streets, the rain glistening like silver threads against the car windows. The city that had once judged her now admired her. But for Ava, it was never about admiration. It was about impact. She leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself, "Let them remember the message, not the dress." Because in the end, it wasn't about the torn gown. It wasn't about the humiliation or even the apology. It was about something far more powerful, how one woman's grace turned arrogance into awakening and judgment into change. And that night, as the city slept, something subtle but extraordinary happened. The story of the torn dress began spreading across social media, not as gossip, but as a lesson. People began sharing their own stories of prejudice, of assumptions, of moments where they had been judged, or where they had judged others. The ripple effect had begun. By morning, the Carter Foundation received more donations than it had in years. But even more importantly, it received hundreds of volunteer applications, from people who wanted to do better to be better. And as Ava sipped her morning coffee the next day, scrolling through messages of love and gratitude, she smiled softly and whispered, "Sometimes the ugliest moments in life lead to the most beautiful changes." Because grace, when chosen in the face of cruelty, doesn't just heal the heart, it changes the world.